I recently upgraded my Dolby Atmos configuration from a 7.2.4 to a 9.2.6, and in the process, I switched from in-ceiling speakers to bookshelf on-wall mounted speakers for my top front Atmos. And in this video, I'm going to tell you which one I think is better and whether or not the data from my room correction software backs it up. Let's discuss. So the speakers that I'm using for comparison are Polk RC80i in-ceiling speakers with an 8-inch woofer and a 1-inch aimable soft dome tweeter aimed towards the main listening position. And for on-walls, I'm using Polk T15 bookshelf speakers with a 5¼ inch driver and a 0.75 inch soft dome tweeter mounted 7 feet 6 inches high on the wall, also aimed at the listening position. With these particular Polk in-ceiling speakers, you only have a small range to angle the tweeter. And this presents a big issue because if you're sitting right underneath the speaker, which is the case for my front row of seats, the tweeter ends up being aimed behind you to the main listening position. Whereas with the on-wall mounted speakers, because they are mounted in front and above, both speakers end up covering all the seats equally, and everyone gets the same experience with the hot effects. The first thing I noticed after switching to on-wall speakers for my front Atmos, after running calibration on my Anthem Arc Genesis, and just casually watching movies before really dialing in my review, was more depth and spaciousness. Wow. The front soundstage immediately felt taller and somehow wider. But something else happened that was unexpected. More on that in a bit. Scenes from A Quiet Place 2, when they're walking through the woods, felt more atmospheric. The added depth made the woods feel more open and spacious than before, and I had a better sense of how much open space was surrounding them and how much ground they had to cover as they were traveling to the hills. The Incredible Hulk scene at the college, when Banner hulks out for the first time in front of Betty in the overpass, he jumps down and lets out a massive roar. The roar reverberates to the front soundstage and up into the height channels, and then continues to reverberate back and up behind you, and the mounted bookshelf speakers made Hulk sound like he was standing in front and over me. Now, I experienced this before with the in-ceilings, but now that my front height channels are directly above my left and right speakers, there's more realism and depth to just how gargantuan Hulk really is. So I use Anthem Arc Genesis for room calibration. So let's take a look and see how both of these speakers measured during room correction to see if there are advantages or disadvantages to using either in-ceiling or on-walls for object-based audio. Okay, so here I have my report of Anthem Arc Genesis after it ran its room correction software, and right now we're going to be looking at the in-ceiling speakers. So if we take a look at the left, over here we have the height 1 left, which is my left height channel, front, and then I have my front height right. So if we take a look here, we can see that the speakers initially don't measure that great, but it looks like from about 55 decibels to around 70 decibels, it's a little bit erratic. And then from 20 hertz to, I guess that's around 3 to 4 kilohertz, it's a little bit erratic there as well. And same thing for the right speaker, the in-ceiling speaker. Doesn't measure very well, but after room correction, after Arc does its corrections, it's actually pretty even. And for some reason, the right speaker, the in-ceiling speaker, seems to not measure quite as good as the left speaker. Because as you can see here, there's a quite a bit of a dip between, or around 3 to 4 kilohertz. And on the left speaker, Anthem was able to correct that pretty much to where it's flat. But on the right in-ceiling speaker, it still has some issues there. but everywhere else it seems to be good. So for some reason there in that 3 to 4 kilohertz frequency range, it just doesn't seem to measure that great. But now let's go ahead and take a look at our bookshelf on wall speakers. Okay, so we have our bookshelf speaker on wall, and we have our left height, and then we have our right height. And as we can see here, these speakers, the bookshelf speakers, measure a little worse than the end ceilings. But when we look at the 40 decibel to around 80 decibel, it measured a lot more flat, or a lot more even, than our end ceiling speakers did. And there's a reason for that, and I'll talk about that after. And then the same thing for the right channel. So a little bit more even, but then this is way more erratic. There's dips and there's peaks, and that's just not, they just did not measure very well. But once Anthem made its corrections, it's pretty even and it's pretty flat. Now there's still a couple of dips here on the left side, the left channel. There's a dip there somewhere around a little bit over 200 hertz, and then the same thing on the right side, the right channel. But yeah, it looks like it measured pretty well afterwards. Now there's a peak here right at 10,000 kilohertz. But on the right side, there's also a peak, but it's not as much, and then it evens out. I'm now an Emotiva affiliate, which means I can start requesting Emotiva gear to review for you guys. But in the meantime, check out my affiliate links in the description for the newly released A2 Plus, B2 Plus, T3 Plus, and C3 Plus speakers. You also might notice that there's a super thanks button on my videos now, where you can contribute monetarily if you like my videos and want to help the channel grow. And lastly, I have a Patreon account now. You can check it out at patreon.com/Hatoraid Cowboy, where I'll be posting some behind the scenes on various content as well as other videos and announcements exclusive to my patrons. All right, let's get back to the video. So after reviewing Arc Genesis report, we can see that the bookshelf speakers didn't really measure all that great in my room. But once Arc Genesis made its corrections, everything smoothed out great, and there really wasn't much of a difference between end ceiling or bookshelf after room correction was applied. Now, I'm pretty sure I know why the bookshelf speakers didn't measure as great in my room, at least compared to my end ceiling speakers. And the reason is simply because the bookshelf speakers have smaller drivers than my end ceiling speakers. There's a considerable difference on woofer size between the two. The end ceilings have an 8-inch driver as opposed to a 5 1/4-inch driver on the bookshelf. So we're talking about an almost 3-inch difference. The end ceilings also have a better frequency response at 35 Hz to 20 kHz versus the bookshelf at 45 Hz to 24 kHz. Finally, the end ceilings have an efficiency of 90 decibels versus the bookshelves at 89 decibels. So the end ceilings are just a better, more efficient speaker, and yet the end result is still more immersive. Why? All right, so the reason why I believe this setup, bookshelf on wall, is superior to my previous setup, my end ceiling Atmos, is because of this. So I have here in my hand a laser distance measurer. So if I was to take a measurement from this speaker to my end ceiling speaker, and I'm gonna turn this upside down so that I can see it, looks like 5.5 feet. So that's a huge, huge difference. So essentially what I've done is I've expanded that bubble of sound. I've expanded it 5.5 feet. So now I have 5.5 more feet of depth. So if you think about before, my end ceiling speaker was firing down and behind the front row. Now, I believe that this is superior because the bookshelf speaker is now lined up with my LCR, so my left and my right speakers. That makes everything taller. It gives me so much more depth, and that's what I'm hearing. Everything sounds bigger. So that depth, that added depth that I've given myself, just totally enhances the Atmos experience. And I really truly believe that this setup is superior than the in-ceiling. What that added depth also does is it gives the Dolby Atmos renderer a bigger bubble to work with and being more precise in placing objects within my listening area. So before, my speaker was above the listening position, but pointing behind to my main listening position. If my in-ceiling speakers were right above my tower speakers up front, then I'd probably get about the same effect. But a bookshelf speaker is just gonna sound better than an in-ceiling speaker. Now again, my in-ceiling speaker is measured better than my bookshelf speakers just because it has bigger drivers. That's the only reason why it measured better, at least I believe. I'm positive that if I get a speaker, a bookshelf speaker mounted in the same location that either has the same amount of drivers or bigger, not only is it gonna measure better, but it's also just gonna give me an even better experience. Now, depending on how your setup is, you might find it to be different. So let me know in the comments what your setup is like, whether you're using bookshelf on-wall speakers, in-ceiling speakers, or Atmos up-firing speakers. I wanna know, and I wanna know why you think your setup is the best. All right, so who really wins between in-ceiling versus bookshelf on-wall for Dolby Atmos? Well, despite my in-ceiling speakers measuring better because of the bigger drivers it has, I have no doubt that if I were to swap out my current bookshelves for something that has the same size woofer and tweeter as the in-ceilings, the bookshelf configuration would be an upgrade, and quality and fidelity would trump in-ceiling speakers. That being said, if we were to go based solely off of measurements, frequency responses, and efficiency ratings, then the in-ceilings would win out because they just measured better. However, I'm gonna give the win to neither of these speakers. What? The real winner is speaker placement. While speaker size, speaker efficiency, and the quality of the speaker is crucial to getting a quality Dolby Atmos experience for height channels, it's the speaker placement that is the most important factor so that the Dolby Atmos renderer can place objects precisely and accurately in a 3D space. The more speakers you have, and the more accurately they are placed in your room, then the more efficient the Dolby Atmos renderer will be at pinpointing objects and placing them precisely in that bubble of sound. But going back to that unexpected thing that I noticed, even though I'm using bookshelf speakers for my front heights in a totally different location, it's hard to describe, but it sounded like sound was still coming from my front in-ceiling speakers. And there were numerous times watching different movies where I actually had to go up to the in-ceiling speaker to make sure that they weren't active. Sometimes that wasn't enough because I would need further confirmation by going into the anthem settings and using the test tones to make sure there was no activity coming from the in-ceilings. It was really weird, but in a good way. And it wasn't like it was localization, but it sounded the same yet different. So that tells me that changing to the bookshelves mounted directly above the left and right channels expanded that bubble of sound, and objects can be more accurately placed within that bubble. All right, guys, now it's your turn to contribute. It's time for Query of the Week. This week's query is, what kind of speakers are you using for your height channels? Are you using in-ceiling, on-wall, or up-firing speakers? Let's get a discussion going in the comments. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please hit the like button and share it with others. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any content. All right, guys, that's going to conclude it for this video. As always, no matter where you're at on your home theater journey, make sure you enjoy it. For Hatoraid Cowboy Cinema, I'm Hatoraid Cowboy, and I'll see you guys in the next video.